Good afternoon, all. I hope you're having a wonderful sunshiny day, even if it was snowy today. Definitely a little snowy today. Today, one of our fellow streamers, second gen, a person that I have the utmost respect for, beautiful, intelligent Miriam Francis, she has Rage Against the Dark Arts YouTube, and she has started a new blog. I'm going to take you there. And her stream is called One Blog Closes, Another Blog Opens. Or more accurately, Mike Rinder has passed away and I have created a Substack account. The era of Mike Rinder writing about Scientology is over, but you can still view his past post on his blog site. In his final entry titled Farewell, Mike Rinder tells us, "My blog site will remain as an archive of more than 4,000 posts and 300,000 comments. It has been a labor of love and passion, which has allowed me to speak my mind and offer my perspective with no outside filters." On the 5th of January 2025, Mike Rinder passed away from esophageal cancer. There are many people who are grieving this recent loss, but in the effort to be transparent, you should know that I am not one of them. Mike Rinder is variously described as a former spokesperson of Scientology, a whistleblower, and a hero, but in truth, he is a former human trafficker who compelled the labor of children. In my opinion, he did not blow that whistle hard enough. Lawrence Wright, author of Going Clear, Scientology Hollywood in the Prison of Belief, summed up Rinder in his description on the underground bunker. Mike was a complicated man, charming, a wonderfully talented communicator, driven and relentless. Yes, Rinder was a complicated man, but I just wish that we were being more honest. Brendan Teague, who was born into Scientology and was 5 years old when he was placed in his child labor camp, considers Rinder to be a friend. Days after Rinder's death, Teague appeared on 10 Tampa Bay and described Rinder as a soccer dad. However, in contrast to the sunny accolade, just 6 months earlier, Tig had told the dark details of his own story about working for Rinder as a 12-year-old child. The interview took place with Rinder's wife, Christy Colburn, on the Exposing Scientology with Mike Rinder podcast, when Colburn stood in for him during his cancer treatment. "We were just another asset to get lots of production done. Schoolwork was the lowest priority possible," Tig said of the time period leading up to his enacting his commitment to a billion-year contract. He describes that as a child, he would be made to do various projects, from sorting boxes of paper to digging trenches. He describes being separated from his father, who was relocated to England for a period of about 2 years. His mother moved Tig and his sister from the east coast of the U.S. to California under the guise that they would be able to go to Disneyland frequently. Instead, she placed them in a facility in Los Angeles, which warehoused children for future labor. Once there, Tig and his sister would wait for that trip to Disneyland for another 3 to 4 years. Colbrand offered from her own experience that there as a 16-year-old that there was an appalling lack of education for children in Los Angeles, saying that there was no school, that it was a pretense, that the structure was there but no education was really happening, no curriculum and no education program, just to follow a rule that says kids under the age of 18 need to be in school, but there wasn't any school happening. Tig agrees and goes on to say that when he was 12 years old, a recruiter from the Office of Special Affairs arrived at his classroom and that he was selected out from amongst the other children. Despite his objections, Tig was pulled from the classroom and placed into the staff training program called the Estates Project Force, the EPF, which involves a particularly rigorous regimen of labor and Hubbard courses. Tig said that he and other children were specifically targeted and selected to work for OSA because they were considered to be squeaky clean. Brendan describes that at 12 years old, his access to education was removed and he began working for Rinder. Rinder's knowledge of child labor laws is confirmed, and in his authorization of a 1986 internal document called a Flag Divisional Directive, which is titled Guidelines RE Minors on Staff. The document shows that it was marked for distribution across all U.S. organizations, including all Office of Special Affairs, and begins, there was a recent shore flap with the U.S. government over the schedule that some minors on staff keep. A minor is someone who is under the age of 18, whereas as a church, we are arguably exempt from the federal and state labor laws. Laws regarding the employment of minors are broader. Federal officials consider that they have a right and responsibility for the minors, and if they receive a complaint regarding the treatment of minors, they are quick to investigate. It is necessary, with this issue, to lay out for all the laws regarding the employment of minors. The document details that children aged 6 to 16 old must attend school under the state law for mandatory education requirements. And under federal law, a child below 14 years old must not be employed. Children who are 14 to 15 years old must not work more than 3 hours a day. The document goes on to stipulate further details regarding the laws on labor and education for persons under the age of 18. This document and ties testimony evidence the fact that Rinder knowingly employed children and compelled their labor under his command in violation of both California state law and U.S. federal law. The U.S. Department of Labor defines what Brendan Tig experienced while being employed under Rinder at 12 years old to be oppressive child labor under the Federal Labor Standards Act, FLSA, of 1938. Recently, the U.S. Department of Justice announced the conviction of 6 former members of UNOI in a press release dated the 16th of September 2024, saying that the former leaders compelled the labor and services of over a dozen victims, including multiple minors, some of whom were as young as 8 years old, between October 2000 and November 2012. The statement goes on to detail the United Nation of Islam and these defendants held themselves out as a beacon of hope for the community, promising to educate and teach important life skills to members, particularly children, said Assistant Attorney General Kristen Clark of the Justice Department's Civil Rights Division. Instead, the defendants betrayed this trust, exploiting young children in the organization by callously compelling their labor. Prosecuting this case is a testament to the Justice Department's unwavering commitment to hold human traffickers accountable. The Justice Department will continue to vigorously investigate and prosecute parasitic criminals who target vulnerable victims to finance their lifestyles. The bravery shown by the victims of the United Nation of Islam is inspiring because they spoke up about heinous atrocities committed against them as vulnerable children, said U.S. Attorney Kate E. Brubacher for the District of Kansas. In childhood, they suffered physical and emotional abuse, were denied a proper education, and were subject to forced labor. As adults, these victims found the strength and courage to pursue justice and face their abusers. Lest there be any confusion, in 1944, the U.S. Supreme Court, the highest ruling body of the nation, upheld convictions which favored state law over religious rights in regard to children. The Prince versus Massachusetts, 321 U.S. 158, 1944. The opinion of the court states that the family itself is not beyond regulation in the public interest, as against a claim of religious liberty, and neither the rights of religion nor the rights of parenthood are beyond limitation. Parents may be free to become martyrs themselves, but it does not follow that they are free in identical circumstances to make martyrs of their children before they have reached the age of full and legal discretion when they can make the choice for themselves. Now let's get back to the beginning. Rinder was raised on the battle cry for religious freedom. Early in his childhood, his parents became interested in Scientology. He was about 10 years old when the 1965 Victorian Board of Inquiry into Scientology was launched, which resulted in the damning report by Kevin Victor Anderson, known as the Anderson Report. Rinder witnessed the banning and attempted destruction of his family's preferred belief system and practices across 3 states for several years, and then experienced the triumph of their victory when these bans were lifted. In 1973, at the age of 18, and after graduating high school, Rinder opted for adventure over university and boarded Hubbard's ship, the Apollo. He rose to power and then maintained his role as commander of the Office of Special Affairs from its inception in 1984 to his departure in 2007. Tig remarked in his conversation with Colburn that though Rinder's title varied during that time, he was always the head of OSA. Though I spent most of my childhood within Scientology's core in Los Angeles from 1990 to 2001, during the time of Rinder's power, I would know little about his role and the network that he directed called the Office of Special Affairs until much later. As a child, I had seen Rinder take the stage many times at international events as I stood to thunderous applause in the Shrine Auditorium. I couldn't easily forget my awe of Rinder's participation in Scientology's battle against the IRS, or the boom of Miscavige's voice when he declared, "The war is over!" I had seen footage of Rinder, Marty Rathman, and Miscavige as they strode into the IRS building, briefcases in hand, and photos of them posing out the front of it with their arms crossed. Back then, they were the A-team. Rough, tough young men in their 30s, vibrant, strong, dedicated, and smart enough to defeat the U.S. Internal Revenue Service. Like Tig, I had been placed into that same child system at 6 years old, abandoned by my parents and plunged into the chaos of hundreds of kids, noisy and hungry for nurture, starving to be seen, jostled amongst the rushing hordes as we poured out into the yard each day. I too eventually would learn that I was not a child, that I was, by their words, an asset. Hubbard's teachings became substitute for my mother's love, for there were no other comforts in my grieving her. In her absence and by her will, they made me their property. I would spend the rest of my young years experiencing psychological harms, being interrogated and punished, robbed of education, and made to believe that my only worth was that I could contribute for the next billion years to serve a thing that didn't really exist. In adulthood, I would learn that this was all the design of a madman, facilitated by our own parents, excited in the fantasies of the stories that they had imagined in the reverie of hypnotism. The enslavement of generations of children across the U.S. and around the world while governments turned a blind eye, perhaps at times looking, but never really seeing, school buildings that did not teach, and children who were not children. Up until his fall from grace, Rinder was a keeper and protector of the system that made children into slaves. In 2007, Rinder left his family, the organization that he had dedicated most of his life to, and the maniacal clutches of its leader behind. Rinder had suffered abuse by Hubbard's words and by Miscavige's hands, but let us not revise history here. Rinder was just not an enabler, he was a ruler and enforcer, a perpetrator and a victim, a war hero and war criminal, a complicated man who both terrorized and uplifted many people. There is no doubt that Rinder has been an effective force in bringing exposure to Scientology abuses, particularly the abuses of David Miscavige. The outpour of comments across several social media platforms makes it clear that Rinder affected people positively around the world, bringing warmth and hope into their lives. Though having felt the cold breath of Rinder's fair game tactics from the beginning of 2024 until his death, I am relieved that he is gone. Even still, after his passing, I feel the glacial chill of him as I witness the whitewashing, hero worshiping, and attempts to scrub clean a felonious past. I just wish they were being more honest. Rinder was the commander of a network which was tasked with hiding crimes, and he held that power for 2 decades. For all his whistleblowing, he has never exposed a single crime for which he could be arrested for. Perhaps it is more truthful to say that Rinder told us the things that he could while avoiding implication of himself. If we were being honest, we would admit that Rinder was compromised to the degree of his interests were conflicted. On one hand, working to destroy Scientology, and on the other, the need for self-preservation. I do believe that made him a complicated man indeed. Perhaps now others will do the same that he could never do, tell the truth. As some of you know, I have a YouTube account against the dark arts, but as a busy working mother of two, I am not in front of the camera frequently, and I figure this will be a great way to keep you up to date with interesting and informative news. So whether you catch me on Substack or YouTube, I look forward to digging in deeper with you. For anyone who has experienced or observed child labor in the U.S., please reach out. How to file a complaint for the U.S. Department of Labor. Anyone who has information about human trafficking should report that information to the National Human Trafficking Hotline, toll free at 1-888-373-7888, which is available 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. For more information about human trafficking, please visit www.humantraffickinghotline.org. Information on the Justice Department's efforts to combat human trafficking can be found at www.justice.gov/human trafficking. Thank you so much, Miriam Francis, for bringing us a new Substack and new articles. We look forward to this, and thank you for bringing the story of Brendan Tigg to us. I'll have to look into that more often. Thank you, and I hope you have a wonderful sunshiny day.